Hey everyone, Dr. Jim from Wellness in Two Words, and this is the promised Facebook Live that was supposed to happen yesterday that is now happening today, and I'm in my backyard just because it's a beautiful day here in Tennessee. So I just wanted to let you know, sorry, there's been a hiatus on making videos. Part of it, I was just mentally exhausted from trying to research COVID with so much evolving data and then with so much contention around it. I had, I guess, some people who were not really liking what I had to say. I don't know. I'm just trying to follow science. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a board certified trained emergency physician that had been in practice for 20 years in the emergency room. I was actually leaving emergency medicine to a degree and transitioning to other things such as hospice care, which I have really enjoyed, although we've had a lot of difficulty doing everything the way we wanted to do just because of shutdowns and other things. It's made it very difficult to really just take care of people. It's been hard. So with that transition, I'm still a full-time physician, but I'm also a mother, and I kind of wanted to share this back to school update for you because we've had an eventful start to school because my son tested positive for COVID. So we really had kind of pulled back as a family, limited our contact with people just because we wanted to not only protect ourselves but protect other people. And so it's kind of, self-imposed. We've muddled through. We've become closer as a family, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I have two teenagers. I have a 14-year-old, almost 15-year-old, and I have a 13-year-old. And so they had started back to in-person school on a balanced calendar. So the balanced calendar for them started on July 16th was the first day of school. And shortly thereafter, literally within 3 days, my son tested positive for COVID. So I'm pretty sure he didn't get it at school. But when we started to relax, what our behaviors were in an area that is strongly positive for Delta with a low vaccination rate, that probably was not the smartest thing for us to do. So let me just kind of walk you through our experience, my brain as a mom, my brain as a physician, and kind of what factored into our decision making. So I'm just going to kind of give you the story. And I want you to kind of just take a deep breath with me. Let's check our politics at the door. Let's check our bias at the door. Breathe in, breathe out, and just listen to what I have to say. You don't have to do anything I have to say. I'm not here to give you advice. I'm here to share in the hope that it maybe helps you make these decisions that are really difficult these days. But for me, it became very easy. So here we go. Here's our story. So July the 12th, we had a family funeral. We visited with some family members. My mom's birthday also occurred during that week. And then we went to pediatrician's appointments for both my son and my daughter. So prior to that, both of my children had both doses of the vaccine. So May 16th was first dose, and then June 6th was their second dose. So they were already well past a month having been vaccinated. They experienced almost no side effects. I mean, it was such a non-event in our household. It was funny because Rachel was like, "Ooh, my arm's sore." I was like, "Your mother has no sympathy for a sore arm." She's a doctor, go away. But I mean, no one got a fever. No one was just, laid out. Like, they slept a little more than normal and they were fine. So then Friday, July 16th was their first day of school. And on the 17th, my son went to a 3-person sleepover after going fishing with his cousins all day. And then on the 18th, he came home that afternoon. We also visited some friends who were in town from South Carolina. So you can see how we've suddenly become a contact tracing nightmare. And then on the 23rd, which was a Friday, exactly 1 week after he started school, his symptoms started with just some congestion. Now, they were due to go to Nashville to visit some friends, my husband and my son. So he had just mowed the yard before he left town because I said, I'm not doing it. And he started having congestion. And I didn't think anything about that. But then when they came home 2 days later on Sunday the 25th, he was still complaining of congestion and a sore throat. So when you go and look at what the CDC has to say about monitoring vaccinated people for symptoms for breakthrough infections. They're going to say, well, they're probably going to be mild. Sore throat, congestion. Eric never had fever. He never complained of headache. He just doesn't complain, but literally he looked like he was having allergy symptoms. However, the doctor and me, when he came home on that night, the 25th, I was like, your eyes look just kind of glassy and had that kind of viral coryza look. I was like, so maybe we ought to test you before we send you back to school. I mean, you literally, haven't been in school but all the week. So we tested him with an at-home test, and it came back positive, like quickly positive. My husband, who's a nurse, he's like, you're supposed to wait 15 minutes to read it. And I was like, dude, this is positive. It came back positive in 2 minutes. But we waited and finalized it, and sure, it was positive. So here's why that test is a good thing for us to monitor symptoms at home. So the Binax, and I'll link below which test it was, and I'll show you a picture of his positive test. I laughed and I said, dude, you're pregnant. He's like, what? And I said, no, I'm kidding. It came out positive just like a pregnancy test would. So it's very easy to read. So you swab your nose, both noses, listen to me, both nostrils, for 15 seconds each. So it's just like a slow swab, circle, keep going. We maybe didn't do 15 seconds, it may have been 10 each, but you don't have to lobotomize yourself. You just put it up there about this far in your nostril and swab nice and slow. And then there's a solution that you put on the card. You make sure the control followed the instructions on it. You stick it in there, and then you seal it, flip it over, and just let it wait. And then what you'll see is there's a control line, which should be positive, and then the next one should be negative. It should stay blank. If it is a positive test, it starts to turn dark pink as well, so that they match, and you have 2 lines. In looking at this test, when they looked at it in January of 2021, when it was rolled out for the public, a lot of the testing that they wanted to do to make sure that it was an accurate test, the party line was, if you're an asymptomatic person, it's really not a good test for surveillance, because it is a much better and more accurate test in symptomatic people. So my first lesson that I guess I could impart is, my son had mild symptoms. We knew he was vaccinated. I suspected he had a breakthrough infection because of Delta prevalence and vaccination rates in our area. So I said, we probably ought to test you. And since you're symptomatic, it'll probably be a reliable test. And sure enough, it was. So when we look at testing for people to make sure that it's accurate, you want to look at your population, and then you want to look at the actual numbers for that test. So I was never good at biostatistics and some things. I was just like, my brain just hurts every time I think about it. But specificity and sensitivity in tests, I usually remember them as spin and snout. Okay, so if it's a high specificity and you're trying to rule something in, spin, then it's helpful. If it's snout, if it's a high sensitivity and you're trying to rule something out, snout. So in this particular case, the specificity for this at-home test is like 99.8%. It's like a pregnancy test. If it's positive, it's probably positive. So at that point, we're like, let's just quarantine. We're going to stay home. We're going to keep him out of school and try not to prevent anybody else from getting sick. The thing about the whole episode that bothered me the most was that he was probably highly infectious while visiting friends we had not seen in a while. I wasn't there, but my husband and my son were, that we cared deeply about in Nashville. And I don't know their vaccination status. And that to me was the thing that just made me just go, now we've exposed people that we care about deeply, potentially to an infection, and I don't know how protected they are. Which is why I'm pro-vaccine. You don't have to agree with me, whatever. So we know that, so here's the thing about breakthrough infections with Delta. We know that they don't protect you from infection. Vaccines were never formulated to protect people from infection. They were formulated to reduce the amount of severe disease from an infection so that your body was already prepared, ready to fight it off, so that you had a very mild infection with something. So now there's been a breakout in Massachusetts. It just hit the news, just splashed today, about there was a get-together of people of the 469 cases, there were quite a few that were vaccinated that actually came back positive for Delta on their PCR, a significant percentage of them, and that 74% of the cases were in people who were vaccinated. So makes you wonder, did the vaccine work in that particular population? Were there some non-responders in there? But if it's 74%, that's pretty high. So it tells you that Delta may be working its way around it, which is why there's such a big push right now to say, let's get ahead of this tiny monster. Okay, so the rest of our family were asymptomatic all along. Like, I never had symptoms. Rachel never had symptoms. My husband did the other part of the test since he was with him all weekend, and his came back negative. Maybe he didn't swab his nose as well. I don't know. But anyway, we've all quarantined. So the other reason why Delta is becoming more of an issue with breakthrough cases is because the R0 value on it is changing. So if you remember way back when coronavirus started, I did some videos on this page way back when, trying to educate myself about this particular situation. The R0 value on the alpha variant, the very original one, was about 2.5. So for every person who was infected, the potential to create disease was for another 2.5 people to get infected and spread it from there. We're now getting into the territory, it's acting more like measles and chickenpox, varicella, in terms of an R0 value of 4.5 or even higher. So I don't know how many of you know this, but if somebody were to walk in the ER right now with measles, we would immediately isolate them. If we saw the rash, we'd be like, oh crud. Put them in a negative pressure room and tell them they can't leave that room, because it is airborne and it's highly transmissible. Its R0 value is 8. For every one infected one person who's infected, 8 people can then, or typically get infected. That's massive. So I guess one thing I would ask you is, hey, if we were having a measles outbreak or a chickenpox outbreak and you weren't sure if you had adequate protection, would you go get a booster? You probably would, because adults, when they get chickenpox, they get really sick. It's not like kids where you get a little virus and a few little like pock marks and different stuff like that. We're talking pneumonia, encephalitis, where you have inflammation of all your brain tissues. It's not a good thing. So I think part of why I want to take the emotion and just the fear out of this is say, if it were any other disease, if it were measles, chickenpox, and you knew your kids were going to school for the fall, what would you do to get them prepared? Hi, Bridget. Bridget wants to join us today. What would you do to say, hey, how am I going to prepare my kids for school? What would make me feel better as a parent for this whole mess that we're in? So for me, it would be making sure they were fully vaccinated or they had a booster. If we knew it's an airborne virus, I would be supporting masks. And I know they suck. Oh my gosh, they suck so bad. Like, I have to put essential oils in the front of my mask sometimes because either I'm like, I need to get gum, I need to go brush my teeth. Like, masks suck. But we had kind of relaxed wearing masks, and it probably wasn't the best decision, because that may have been where we got our exposure. We'll never know. And would Eric have gotten sicker down the road? We'll never know. I'm pretty happy knowing all he had was just some mild congestion and a sore throat for about 3 or 4 days. And if that's all that ever was, that was the point. So I think the other thing to remind ourselves is that we now are selecting for more virulent strains, because it's just all numbers. When you have your first wave or second wave of a pandemic that rolls through and it really gets your more susceptible individuals, which now thankfully quite a few of them are vaccinated, that takes your pool of available hosts from the more susceptible to the healthier younger people who are saying, well, I'm not going to get serious disease, so I'm not going to get vaccinated anyway. But at the same time, as that virus is circulating through, because if there's one certainty, well, if there's 2 certainties in this whole thing, we all hate COVID. If there's one thing we can all agree on, we all hate this virus, right? So the second thing is, we're all going to get exposed to it at some point. Like, you're not going to be able to escape COVID. So the question's going to be, if you have this available pool of people who are not getting vaccinated, who are young and healthy and might have mild disease, although that picture is changing, then you are automatically selecting for a more virulent strain just so it can hang around, because its host pool is a more fit pool. So that virus is going to have to be more transmissible. It's going to have to be more virulent. It's going to have to make more copies of itself just to stay around. So that's really concerning. And then when it comes to long COVID, we have a lot of questions. I mean, viruses are not anything new, but when you think about the potential that they have, people forget that with measles, there was subacute, oh my gosh, right here, it's SSPE. It's subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, where people basically in 10 years, they get a dementia Parkinson's type picture. Oh, now the dogs are coming to join us. They get this picture that almost seems like Parkinson's because it's just of progressive brain damage from the viral infection. And that's usually appears, 8 to 10 years out. Well, luckily now that's very uncommon, because measles is, we have a large vaccination campaign against measles. So it's really kind of cut down on the incidence of those cases. But if you look in developing countries where vaccination still is where they're still struggling, you still see cases of like that in India. You'll see cases associated that with measles. Cytomegalovirus is a herpes virus that by the time you're at the age of 40, 100% of people have been exposed to it, right? But if you get exposed to it when you're pregnant, it can cause congenital deafness in a child. That's a horrible outcome. If that were preventable, wouldn't we want to prevent it? So, and whooping cough. Here is another example of why vaccination on a much higher level helps protect the vulnerable. Babies can't get vaccinated against whooping cough until they reach a certain age. And so that's why with the tetanus booster, they had added in the whooping cough protection, component with pertussis, so that they can protect those children, because even with antibiotic therapy, there's a high percentage of chance that they'll die. So when you get vaccinated, you're protecting somebody who may be vulnerable, who maybe can't get vaccinated yet, which would be kids under 12. We just don't know what's going to happen with that. So that was our eventful start to school. Now, when it comes to lots of other questions, just send me your questions, because I'm totally happy with answering questions. And I see somebody, yay, I see some people who've logged on, and that's great. So, Valerie, what are your thoughts for teens and vaccine? My 2 kids were vaccinated. It was kind of a non-event in our house. I'm very grateful that we had the vaccine, because I knew that exposure was a certainty. And lo and behold, that is exactly what happened. And then him getting sick with it and exposed to it was a non-event as well. So I am grateful. I understand other people may not have that experience. And so here's the kind of the perspective I want to give people to on just numbers and statistics, okay? Because data is imperfect if you interpret it incorrectly. So, VAERS. I know you guys have heard about VAERS. It's out there in the news. It is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It's like a giant, thank you, Val. It's like a giant bulletin board for vaccine-associated events. Now, they tell you on their website, and they say that, here's that quote, any symptoms can be reported on VAERS by anyone. And I would argue probably any outcome could too. So it's not regulated. There's no gatekeeper. Again, it's just like a giant bulletin board. Anybody can stick something up there and say, bam, I had the vaccine, and bam, my toe turned purple next week or like a week later. So it must be related. Not necessarily. Temporal relationship and causation and correlation are often misconstrued because we have our own biases that we kind of bring in there. I am not going to deny that there are vaccine injuries. I 100% agree that there are. This is about numbers. This is about humanity and the population in general, okay? If you look on any given day in the United States, there are about 8,000 baseline deaths per day. We have 330 million people in our country. On any given day, 8,000 people have died. If you extrapolate that over 7 months, then you come up with a figure, I can't do math, right? 1.64 million deaths over 7 months. On VAERS, there have been 12,000 adverse events suggesting death over 7 months. That's not nearly 1.64 million, right? So that's a really small number. When you look at the number of, now it's not small if you're one of those people, I get it. And I'm just saying, if we assume that every event on there is verifiable and correct, that is a vaccine associated death, right? I mean, that's a lot of people, right? However, until we verify them, I'm just saying, just give them the benefit of the doubt. When you have 340 million doses that have been administered throughout the country, right? We have 170 something million people that are fully vaccinated and other people that are partially vaccinated. If you take 12,000 and divide that by 340 million, you've got a 0.000035% chance of a vaccine-related adverse outcome such as death. That's a really good statistic. I'm just talking numbers here. Now, maybe I've misinterpreted. Anybody who's a math nerd, feel free to text me, straighten me out. So I think VAERS, I'm not even going to pay attention to VAERS. I just think it's not regulated. Oh my gosh, the neighbor's dogs. Right now, of course they would choose now. If I go inside, the dogs bark. If I come outside, the dogs bark. Whatever. I think I'm not even going to consider that a valid source right now just because there's no oversight. Absolute zero oversight. I'm going to give you a classic example of how something like VAERS could totally go awry. Let's say a new restaurant opens up. And in this new restaurant, this person's invested a lot of time and energy into it. They're like, I just want to make good food for good people. I love people. Let's make good food. 100 people show up for the opening of the restaurant. Now, keep in mind, this isn't even near the statistics I just gave you. But if 100 people show up for that restaurant opening and one person gets sick, let's even say 2 people in the same household get sick, and they say, I got food poisoning from that restaurant, but nobody else at the restaurant that night got sick. You would go, are you sure it was the food? Or did you get an exposure sometime earlier in the week? Or did you eat something else from somewhere else that you didn't know could have been the cause? Or are you even sure it was food poisoning? Are you sure it just wasn't like viral diarrhea? Like, what? How can you say that with certainty? And this person's going to go, I'm telling you, I know it was the food at that restaurant. And then my husband also did that. And I'm pretty sure it was it. But nobody else got sick. So, fine. But other people go to that restaurant regularly. They love it. They're like, this is the best food. Da-da-da. Are we going to shut the restaurant down? No. Now that person, because of their own confirmational bias and experience, to their dying day will say, I got food poisoning from that restaurant. Okay, fine. No one denied the fact that you got sick. No one is denying the fact that you were miserable. What they're saying is that correlation may not be true. That causation is not there because it's not proven because other people did not experience. Now, if you, over the time of that restaurant, see that many people have eaten there and they get 100% health, inspection score from the health department, and literally it was isolated to just a few small people, occasionally, once in a while, will get sick, you're going to say it's probably not the restaurant. So I just want to kind of explain to you that correlation and causation are not the same and that bias can be very strong. You can say, hey, there's more ice cream consumption in the summer in the United States and more murders occur in the summer in the United States. So therefore ice cream causes more murders? No, it's a classic example of misinterpreting correlation and causation. So I just want to kind of remind ourselves that bias can be there, and it always helps just to kind of take a deep breath and take our own tendency for confirmational bias out of that. Am I still alive? I hope I'm still alive. Okay. I think at this point we have enough data points that for me, I feel like, hold on a second. I don't know what's going on with, I don't know if it went on. Anyway, I feel like confirmation bias is very strong and that the numbers that we have support that this is relatively safe and that there's a very low incidence of events. Now, you are free to make whatever decision you make in this country. I do not support mandatory vaccinations. In this world, I just think that education is the way to influence people about these things. And I think that for now, there's mounting evidence that those of us who have any trepidation or are on the fence about it, that a lot of the myths that are associated with it are indeed, I think, myths. A lot of them are based in theoretical assumptions that some people have made For instance, it doesn't affect fertility. There are people who were in the vaccine trials originally that have since gotten pregnant. That was all theoretical. There was a question, could it cross-react with a placental protein? No. Some women have said their menstrual cycles have gotten a little awry. I would argue that stress can do that. Food can do that. There are many other things. Like, you can't point the finger just at that, because it doesn't mean that there may be some people that have reported that as a side effect, but that isn't probably a major side effect either. Do you know what I mean? That'll work itself out. The whole idea of, I've already had it, I don't need it, but we know that variants are coming. We know that they're going to continue to circulate. That's also a concern. I don't know. Send me more questions, because I have lots up here that I could share, but I don't want to just go on and on forever. The point of this was to share our experience with our COVID infection. We've tried to take appropriate measures. I haven't really gone out very much to try to limit it around our house, and same thing as my husband. He's gone to work, but he tested negative, but he masks up when he goes to see people. So we're doing everything we can. Eric and Rachel come out of quarantine on the 3rd, and they'll go back to in-person school, and now that school has instituted a full masking policy for any indoor activity, and I support that leadership, because again, we're in an area where Delta is spreading further. Oh, and that's the other thing. We didn't do a confirmatory PCR test on him because, again, I was like, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Delta. I'm pretty sure, with a positive antigen test showing that you have active protein in your nose. When we called the pediatrician, he was like, I wouldn't bother with a confirmatory PCR, even from an epidemiological standpoint, just because you can be pretty sure that's what it is. So it's all good. Let's see what some questions are. I'm going to regularly test at home during the school year. Okay, so that is a fantastic question. I think you have to look at the practicality of that. These tests are about $25 for 2 of them, and we pay for that out of pocket. So if my kids stay asymptomatic, knowing kind of how the Delta variant is tending to behave, with breakthrough infections, people typically aren't asymptomatic. Just because the viral load is really high, it's up to 1,000 times higher. So let's just give you perspective. Say you have a viral load of 100 viral particles in the nose at any given time. It's 1,000 times higher than that in a lot of people. So knowing that someone could potentially be infectious, that's why you want to kind of keep it all here. So I would say we are not going to routinely test. We'll test if the kids are symptomatic, because I think most people with the Delta variant who are vaccinated, and this could prove me wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're going to become symptomatic. Now, they may be mild symptoms. Again, we thought his was allergies, and then it was like the sore throat, and then he had kind of the glassy eye look, and I was like, this looks more like a virus. I had high index of suspicion, knowing that we had relaxed behaviors. So we probably will not routinely test. I'll only test if people become symptomatic. And if there is a booster down the road that's more specific against Delta, or if they're showing more and more erosion of that vaccine-induced immunity against the future variants, will get a booster. For now, they're not recommending a booster, which I think is great. Now, my mom, who is immunosuppressed and had a kidney transplant, she had both doses of the vaccine. There's strong evidence to suggest that they don't get the T-cell mediated immunity from that, which would make sense. She's on a T-cell suppressing medication. But with subsequent boosters, there is some evidence that perhaps they could get better immunity, or it could actually bump their percentage of coverage. In her case, I would recommend a booster once the CDC says yes, because that does make sense. I would assume that I have, pretty decent coverage. I'm young and healthy and not immunosuppressed. But for people who are immunosuppressed, especially on medications that definitely immunosuppress T cells, that's where the bulk of the immunity for this comes from, is T-cell, B-cell communication. So that, in her case, would make more sense to do a booster. So no, we probably won't routinely test. We'll just watch for symptoms. And I do want them to stay in-person school. It has been a big lifeline for us, because we were getting pretty lonely. The other thing, too, is to say, on a government level, on a policy-making level, my daughter was so funny. She said, why did politics even get into this? Shouldn't that have been up to the doctors and the healthcare experts? I was like, you're such a smart little 13-year-old. Policy makers make policy, and that's what they do. So I think from the standpoint of going back to in-person school this fall, there are a lot of practical questions I would have about masking for kids. So as a parent, this is what came to my mind. Okay, I understand the CDC is suggesting and it's recommended, and the school system maybe doesn't want to do it because it's a pain and it's upsetting and it's da da da. I get that. However, if you put it in the space of personal choice, some kids' parents may choose to, other kids' parents may not. It's really hard on kids, right? Because if your parent says to you, you need to wear this mask all day because we feel like it gives you good protection. If another parent says masks are useless and we're not going to do it as a family, you, number one, introduce the potential for bullying because you have people with different beliefs that are very apparent, very obvious on the surface. So some kids may not handle that as well, and I think that that's really stressful for a child. If you make it universal across the board and everybody has no choice, well, guess what? There you go. Everybody does it. There's no questions. There's no targeting people. There's just no question about what should be done. What about the child who goes to school, the parent says they need to wear a mask, but then they're like, I can't do this anymore, or they get bullied and they take off the mask. And then they potentially put their family at risk because they were around people who were also not wearing a mask who potentially transmit virus. And then someone in their family gets sick. That creates a whole different level of stress for that child. And they feel like they're being dishonest with their parents, and they should never be put in that position. I think if you make it across the board, every child, every parent, every administrator, until we get more information, that's so much kinder to the kids because they can't get vaccinated yet. It's not approved for them. So if they're under 12, where does that leave those poor kids? Feeling like they're deceptive, they're dishonest, feeling like they're targeted, come on, they're kids. So if they can't be adequately protected, and if you can't guarantee across the board, what's the word I'm looking for? Implementation of that policy, you're going to create bigger problems than just making everybody wear a mask to school. But that's my own personal opinion. And for the argument of, well, masks hold diseases in, I'm like, well, okay, so if you're going to make the argument that masks hold diseases in, then wouldn't that make it effective that masks hold disease in and they don't put it out in the environment? I don't know. It's just, you can't have, it's kind of like the whole argument with VAERS where they were saying, well, look at all these things that are associated with vaccines. But then you're saying, hold on a minute. Early when we did case counts, you can't attribute certain deaths like a traumatic death to COVID, and they were incidentally together, and saying that wasn't okay. So you can't have both sides of that logic. You have to pick a position and stick with it. Yeah, I know, Valerie, and that's tough, especially on anybody who's a teacher and educator too, that masks are optional in some areas. And I would argue that is very much political. If it were any other virus and there had been no preceding history and there were a measles outbreak, don't you think that they would be saying to do that? It's because it's COVID and it's become politicized that they're choosing not to do that because they're getting pushback from a lot of people. And it's going to be confusing. So you know what? I would say to that, it's the responsibility of the school system to make it simple. They should make it simple. They should say everybody should wear a mask until we get more information and more case counts and data, knowing that we're all going to be indoors on top of each other, and we know that there is a more transmissible variant out there, right? So, and I had one other thought when I was writing it down. I was like, oh, golly, where was it? I don't know. I had like a little brilliant thought that I wrote off on the side. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I was reading an interview of some parents about back to school and masks. And some of the quotes were unbelievable. I was like, do you hear the logic that you're saying out there? And you're totally contradicting yourself, but yet you don't see that you're contradicting yourself. Kids are just little germ factories. Awesome. Masks don't work for prevention. They just make you sick by holding in the disease. Oh, don't worry. They'll keep them safe at school, even though we have a virus that's kind of flying below the radar. How are they supposed to do that? And especially if they're not going to do contact tracing anymore, because forget it, that's just impossible with the prevalence that we have. I just think those notions are a little Pollyanna, I guess. Say, oh, they'll keep them safe. Well, you know what? There's a lot of stuff you expect teachers to do, but guess what? As a parent, you should just be doing that on your own. I would argue that we need to be doing masks. Let's see. I'm kind of interested in some of these comments because I definitely want to be supportive of people and let you have a voice to hear. I can't see the whole thing. Yeah, right. So no one wore their mask correctly. Amen, Lisa. This is true. That's why having one that fits well along the nose, the ones I got, I think were from Zazzle, and they have a little wire in the top so you can conform it to the top, and then you can make sure it's snug around the ears. It had a little adjustable thing down here. You could put a knot at the bottom so that it pulls to it. I mean, after a while I wear a mask, I would get a little headache. I noticed that my nose kept getting like pinched down here and I would get a sore in my nose. It sucks. 100% it sucks. But I can tell you this, that my kids have been doing remote learning for a week. And although I'm grateful that that infrastructure was there and already set up, it's not the same. It isn't the same. So if we're going to make the argument that remote learning isn't ideal and that in-person instruction is ideal, then we need to do everything we can while they're doing in-person learning to protect them. That's just my position as a parent. Because you can't have all of it. You can't have in-person learning, this variant floating around, and a low vaccination rate county, and then also have no protection, no masks, no distancing, nothing. Like, well, fine, let's just let it all fly loose. Then why don't we go to having COVID parties? Saw how that worked out for people, just like they used to do chickenpox parties and measles parties. Come on. Like, let's just use our common sense, use the tools that we can to protect ourselves. I'm going to be saying to my kids, wear your mask in school, definitely, all the recommendations that they make, because they're following CDC guidance, regardless of how you feel about the CDC. They've been on target with a bunch of this stuff. And then just see how it evolves. But I have a feeling this winter is going to be a hard winter. Now, here's the other flip side of this coin. It could be that Delta is so fit and so transmissible and so virulent that it's going to come through just like a tsunami and then peter out really quick. This is indeed a possibility, but there's no way to know how that's going to play out. There's been some evidence it might have done that in the UK, but we don't know for sure. If it does, that'd be great if it comes through and it peters out pretty quickly. But my question would be is how many people are going to die in the meantime? We aren't going to know that answer until hindsight. It's 2020. And I would just, Phil Valentine right now in Tennessee he's actually not even on a ventilator. Well, he's on a ventilator, but he's now also on ECMO. And early on in the disease, when you went on ECMO, which is extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, it's basically like bypass for the lungs, where you artificially oxygenate someone. You have to filter their blood through a machine to oxygenate for them because their lungs no longer work in that capacity. The prognosis for people who were on ECMO was really low. Now, it's much better now if you do it within the first week, I think, of respiratory failure. They tend to do better, and 75% of them may survive. But who really wants to get to that point? That's my question. So, and that person was a anti-vax, anti-mask loudspeaker, which is really a shame because I'm sure his family wishes he weren't ill. So I guess I don't have a whole lot to say. I haven't done a video in a while. If you want to see more videos, if you want me to answer questions, if you have more topics you want me to do, because I could talk about food and good food and the right kind of food for you all day long, and I definitely want to get back into that. But I think knowing that all of this was out here with COVID and questions and then our own personal experience, which hopefully was helpful to you to discuss, I'll probably end this video in this little session, but let me know what you want. Put some comments in there about what you want this page to be and how you want me to help with health questions, okay? And I am also going to download this and put it on the YouTube channel and post it permanently to the page as well. So, hi, Lisa. So, I appreciate everybody who was on today, and I hope to see more of you soon, okay? And please share. Please like and share this. That would help me a lot. Yes, no sugar. Bad. Sugar bad. Fat good. All right. I will talk to you soon, and thank you so much. I appreciate all the support. And actually, Eric was supposed to be a special guest, but he stayed up gaming last night, and so he's not here today, but I promise he is well and alive. Trust me. He's probably gonna have to mow the yard again today or tomorrow, so we're all good. Thank you. Love you guys. Appreciate it. Bye.